President Biden signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill last year. So far, more than $80 billion of it has been dedicated to projects. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg recently updated lawmakers on their progress and challenges. Eugene Mulero is a senior congressional reporter at Transport Topics. Eugene, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So what are some of those projects that are already underway?
Yes, so the $80 billion really focuses on three areas: the supply chain, climate change, and new technologies. When it comes to the supply chain, we're talking about money that is dedicated for the ports primarily, so those agencies are able to have additional funding to move freight more efficiently from the ports all the way down to our supermarkets and our stores. That's essentially the supply chain. They need money to modernize those ports, as well as recruit and retrain people for their workforce. On the climate change, we're talking about money for state agencies so they're able to retrofit buildings and vehicles and reduce emissions, and build projects that are able to withstand the impact of a major hurricane and floods. And then with new technologies, this is your autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, and then also the Internet of Things. So this is to dedicate money, $7.5 billion for electric vehicles, let's say, to ensure that there is a transition from the traditional vehicle to these modern vehicles.
So this bill was signed into law before inflation really hit these historic highs. So what impact is that going to have?
Yeah, so inflation is a really big concern, especially on the part of members of Congress. They're hitting the US DOT hard on the impact that it will have on the cost of projects. And the department has acknowledged that inflation will, in the near term, affect how it will very likely increase how agencies are paying for a new road repair, a new tunnel. The secretary told Congress recently that the department is calculating how to respond to inflation, meaning whether they need to increase their grant allocation to make up for this cost, the cost difference. But at this time, with the implementation of the law, it remains status quo, but inflation is pretty much on the radar, and members of Congress, the Republican caucus, is really sounding the alarm on that.
I want to ask you about oversight, because this is a lot of money. So what mechanisms are in place to make sure that there isn't fraud, waste, and abuse?
We've been hearing a lot from the White House. The White House announced a infrastructure czar, Mitch Landrieu, who's overseeing the implementation of all these provisions. The White House also established with OMB a task force that is multi-agency at the top level with the secretaries, and all of them are overseeing the distribution of the funding. In-house at DOT, they also created an internal task force, and then we have the usual suspects. We have Government Accountability Office. They have to submit reports on the implementation. We have the U.S. Department Inspector General at Transportation. The IG there is required to do reports. And then we have your outside government watchdogs who are also overseeing this.
Let's talk about the process. Who decides what projects get funded, and how does that go?
Yeah, so while it is an intricate process, in simplest terms is that for most of the funding, DOT will have a grant application program. And for these grants, some of them are new, some of them have been there for several years. They open it up for applicants, and state agencies, local governments submit their applications. The department will have webinars to explain to these agencies the best practices for applying for these grants. And then once these applications are submitted, all of this will be in the Federal Register. There will be a notice of funding opportunity. And then with the timeline, saying that for 3 months they'll review applicants, another 3 months to internally decide recipients. So a process will be submitting an application for a grant, let's say, waiting several months to hear back from DOT, and then DOT will award maybe half a year or a year into it.
That's what I was going to ask is the timeline. Are we looking at a year between the grant application to when they're actually starting the project?
All grants are different. They have different timelines. Some of them will be in the months, 3 to 6 months, but other grants that we're talking for what they call these mega projects that would be to really either upgrade an entire bridge or a metropolitan freight corridor. Those will be, they could take about a year in the whole application process. The money will then be dedicated to that recipient, and that recipient will go through the process of taking that money, incorporating it into their operating budget. So this is a multi-year process to get the money from the federal level all the way down to your state agency.
So how many jobs is this all going to create? Because this is going to need a lot of workers. And do we have enough workers given the job market right now?
Yeah, so that's a great point. If you're hearing from the White House, when President Biden says this, we're going to enter the infrastructure decade, if you look at the 10-year timeline, you can presumably expect about millions of jobs to be created through that time period. But in the near term, a lot of the people in the transportation community are just focusing on specific projects and how many jobs that project will have. So several hundred for a road repair project in this city, 1,000 for that transit system over there. So at this point, it's unclear whether anybody can say millions of jobs will be created, but we're talking definitely in the hundreds of thousands of jobs in the near term. And there's an expectation that with all the incentives in the law to recruit and retain, that the workforce will be accrued to respond to these demands.
All right, Eugene, well, we'll watch this as this unfolds. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.